Welcome to Unbecoming. My name is Phoebe Morochek, and I am the host of Unbecoming, the podcast and the radio show. I am so excited for you to be here today. If you're new here, welcome. If you are a loyal listener, welcome back. I am so excited for today's episode because I got to interview a new friend, somebody I have followed for months, if not years now, and someone I know that you are going to absolutely adore if you don't know him already. And if you do already know him, just know that he is as awesome, as nice, as kind and generous in real life as he is in all his videos, which is what I was so surprised, not necessarily surprised, but you know when people that you look up to and you actually meet them and there's that little bit of difference. I have to say, Lee is exactly who he portrays, if not even a little bit better in real life. So I know that you're going to love today's episode. And the questions I was asking him were around using your intuition, tapping into your intuition and practical tools and takeaways that I know that you're going to be able to action. That is what this show is all about. It's not just kind of talking about, especially the woo, especially spirituality, things that we talk about in depth at length on today's episode. Yes, it's great to talk about, but how do we put that into action? So that is what I talked to him today about. Now, I'm going to read his bio because I think it's important. If you don't already know him, then where have you been? But if you don't already know him, I think it's important to let you know where he has come from, who he is, and why we should be listening to him. On the other hand, if you already know who he is, if you follow his monthly updates, then this will be probably very familiar to you. So Lee Harris is the founder and CEO of Lee Harris Energy, a multimedia worldwide event and production house. He reaches hundreds of thousands of people every month in his monthly energy updates. This is what I was talking about. If you don't watch them, then I have a whole page where you can find out all of that information, and he goes into depth about it at the end of the episode. He also has his Soul Magic and Energy Mastery retreats and energy tune-up seminars held all over the world. In more recent years, he has expanded his work to include teaching entrepreneurship through his Impact the World training program, online courses, and his free weekly Impact the World podcast, which he launched this year in 2020. If you are an entrepreneur or a business owner who is curious about how he got to where he is, how he built a multi-million-dollar online company that, in my opinion, is difficult to do, or my previous opinion was that it was difficult to build a spiritual business with everything that is going on right now in the world, and that sometimes it doesn't always feel tangible. So what I did was I held Lee back for a couple minutes after we stopped recording, and we started recording a new segment for the Rapid Fire Business Session. In this episode, in this session with him, it is under 10 minutes, and I just asked him questions about how to use his intuition to make important business decisions, how he functions, how he hires, what he has had to start doing and stop doing in his business in order to scale to $1 million plus. And then the first question I always ask is, what is the greatest strategy, tip, tool, resource that you have used in the last 3 to 5 years that has had the greatest impact on the growth and success of your business? So we had a really candid conversation about what he has done to grow his business. So if that's something that you are interested in personally, or you would get great benefit out of, again, as I said, it is under 10 minutes. It is a really, really powerful rapid fire session. So I'd encourage you to go over to unbecomingpodcast.com/133. So again, that's unbecomingpodcast.com/133. Now, on that page, you're going to find all of the resources that he talks about. We're going to have a list of his book, his podcast, where you can find more information about Lee, because once you get done with this episode, I think you will be just as in love with him as I am. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into my interview with my brilliant new friend, Lee Harris. All right. I am so excited to be here with you today, Lee. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here with you too.
Thank you. So I have been a fan of yours. I've watched a lot of your videos. And before we kind of get into the London Tube situation that happened, which I desperately want to talk about, I want to kind of start with your childhood. And I want to take us back to England where you were, and what was your childhood like?
So I come from a really loving family, like, and as you grow up, you really look at the values of your family with a clearer eye, the older you get. And so I was born into an environment of a good, loving family and good extended community. My parents had friends who were like family to us. And so in terms of community and connection, everything was like tick box. And I look back now and I see that I was quite a creative and introverted child, especially when I was being creative. I would go into these creative modes and I would go off and make things happen. And even though I'm the third child, there was a gap of 6.5 and 8 years between me and my brother and sister. So I always feel like I was a little bit of an only child, like a half only child, half sibling in a way, in terms of my experience of being alone a lot, often just with my mom, because my dad was at work and they were out of school. So my experience of childhood, I can't exactly pinpoint why it happened, but at a certain point, I started to develop this eating disorder, which manifested as I would binge eat sugar. It wasn't like bread or crisps or anything like that, or you call them chips in America. In England, chips are fries, but that's a whole other story. I developed this binge eating that I now look back and I see it was the intuitive side of myself and the empathic, sensitive side of myself that were both completely lost. Like, unless I was creating and channeling energy through creativity, I loved the love that I saw going on in the groups, but something just felt deeply lonely and deeply disconnected about just being on the planet and human emotions. And what I now realize is I was picking up on all kinds of things, but not knowing how to process any of them. And so I was taken to Weight Watchers age 10. So I, became the identity of the fat kid. And I knew some people growing up who were heavier and they were happy, but I was not one of those, even though I was probably trying to convince other people I was fine. So I was in and out of diet clinics all through my teens, and I would lose all this weight and gain all this weight and lose all this weight and gain all this weight. My poor mom, didn't know I was secretly eating, going off and buying myself these snacks. So, we moved to down south in England when I was 6 years old. And I've never really spoken to mom about this, but I wonder about how I dealt with the family stress of that move, because I think it was pretty stressful for my parents. And I don't think they ever really explained or told, maybe they were just trying to cope. They wanted to give us a better life. My dad was offered a good job. So, but yeah, I look back and I wonder how that transplanting affected me, even though I'm grateful I grew up where I grew up. So that was kind of childhood for me. And my greatest joys in childhood were creative expression. I found theater pretty young. I was really good at shape-shifting in a theater production. I didn't know how to play myself because my sense of self-identity was pretty screwed up. But I did know how to become Shylock in Merchant of Venice, or be the villain in the Christmas show, or, and I loved that. It was like being able to pour yourself into something else. So in a way, it was a form of channeling happening early, but very much expressed and physicalized through the body. So theater, music, creativity, they were my saving graces as a kid growing up.
And so is that kind of leads you into university when you went into theater? And so why was that such I guess, what part of theater for you was so attractive? Just that you could escape yourself, or you could be somebody else, or what was it about it?
There was an electricity that would run through my body when I was doing it. Now I would equate the same thing to if I'm doing a live event. One of the gifts of my work for me, as someone who doesn't love preparing, is I have now, because I've done it so much, I've learned how to show up on a stage, I did personal private sessions for 14 years when I would show up to this person I didn't know, and for the first 30 minutes, I would tell them about themselves, what I received intuitively. So I think that developed a confidence and a practice with the intuitive talking that I now do as part of my job. And that same electricity that I'll feel when I work with a live group in a room is the same electricity I felt when I was on stage. It's being a conduit for something, having a connection with an audience, because I always tell the people at my live events, it might look like I'm up here in charge of the talking, but you're more in charge of my talking than you realize. If I'm really doing this right, I am saying the things that this room needs to be talking about in order for us to have an expansion experience. So I think that's what it was for me with theatre. But by the time I went to drama school at the age of 19, couple things. I think the people pleaser in me was doing what I should have done, which was gone to drama school, because I was this, a lead in theatre since I was 9 all the way through. And, it's like, oh, well, of course Lee's going to be an actor. That's what he's supposed to, that's what he's really good at. That's what he's celebrated for. And yet I think I went to drama school with a bit of not a heavy heart, but a heavy heart about the idea of being a professional actor. I graduated top of my year, which I felt very uncomfortable with. Because it was this communal experience, and that showed me I didn't necessarily like being separated. I didn't like being pulled away from my who had been my classmates for 3 years. So there was this shying away from the spotlight, but there was also this new relationship that had happened with music. And I heard music at the age of 20. I loved music from a kid. I would sing. But I now realize it was my first channeling experience. And many musicians will say this, that they're creating, a song comes from the ether. Tori Amos was someone I was a huge fan of back then. And she was the first musician I'd ever heard who would speak about songwriting as a shamanic process, and that she was working aurically and ethereally in the way that she was bringing the music down. So writing music happened to me a year before I left drama school, which was also a year before I started channeling. And I left drama school, worked for about a year, and then kind of announced I wasn't going to do it, much to the horror of my poor parents, who had put me through, I'd worked at drama school so that I could, but they'd really helped me. And everyone was like, what the hell's he doing?
Okay. So now take us to the tube moment, because we're in that process. So you have left, you've declared that you're not doing this, and then then
I'm doing a job in fundraising in London, and I'm in a relationship. So as I was growing up, I figured out, oh, damn, I'm not heterosexual. And that is going to be really inconvenient, because that was what all the signals around were saying. It was like, oh no, you're supposed to be this. And I was like, oh God. So, I was dealing with that. But at a certain point, I came out to my friends, I came out to my family, and I was in a relationship, which was my dream. It was like, because especially when you're told you can't have love, you're not going to be allowed love, you're not going to be allowed to have what all your best friends have, because most of my friends were heterosexual. It's like you want it more than anything, and it's going to be validating, and it's going to be all these things. And I was in a tricky relationship at the time, but I was determined, because that's typical me, especially back then. So I was in this relationship, I was doing this job in fundraising. I had a job that I really cared about, because I was working for charities such as Greenpeace and Oxfam. So I liked that it was in the right place. If I was going to have a job, at least it was doing some good in the world. I was working on my music career, trying to get that to take off, preparing to make my first album. And I was on the tube, on the London Underground, and I was going to work in fundraising, and it was really interesting. I'd been reading lots of spiritual books for many years, and I'd been going to tarot card readers, and I'd started to figure out that if I used tarot cards, I could get intuitions about people. It was kind of an accident. Friend bought me a deck, we put some cards down, and I started getting this information, but honestly, I didn't really believe it. People would be sat there going, how did you know that? And I would be like, oh, and I just wrote it off, because why would you think that's real? To me, even though I was a fan of woo-woo, woo-woo was a separate world. It was a world I would never be part of. I would only ever buy the books of, or occasionally I might, oh, wow, look at that person on stage who's full on woo-woo. Wow, I love it. But I'll never be it, surely, because it's separate. And then I was on the London Underground one morning, and I had a, yet another not very good argument in our relationship. And I was being punished by my then partner, which was common, actually. And so I was very upset, very distressed, and I was convinced about why it had happened and why I was the victim. And I was thinking all these thoughts, all these self-doubt, self-judgment thoughts. And suddenly this voice to the left of my head, that I'd never heard this voice before. And still to this day, if I speak to the Z's, I hear them about here. It's different for everybody with channeling. People sometimes feel the words, or it's different positions. But if I'm talking to them, I hear them here. And they said, that's an interesting theory, but you're wrong. And I was like, what? And then they proceeded to tell me why I was wrong, what I had got wrong, and how I could overcome it. And I was just a little bit gobsmacked. And honestly, my first thought was, is this schizophrenia? Because I'd heard of schizophrenia, and I was like, well, this could be schizophrenia. Maybe this is how it happens. And I knew nothing about schizophrenia, really. So, I was grasping at straws. But I had been taken to see a channeler about 6-7 months earlier. And even though I loved tarot card readings, I loved someone who'd tell me they were a psychic and do a reading, that I could understand. But being taken to see this channeler, I left skeptical, not of him or his wisdom, but of the circus act of channeling. So he's a lovely guy, lovely wife. My friend takes me, it's her thing. She's like, I'm going to take you for a chat. And I was like, okay, I love all that stuff. And I sit down, he closes his eyes and he starts doing all this talking. And I remember thinking, well, he clearly is wise and intuitive. Why is he closing his eyes and putting on a funny voice? Why doesn't he just look me in the eye and tell me? And now, of course, egg is on my face, because when I channel, my voice does change a bit. And it is different. And I now understand, because when you're channeling, you're not just, it's like if you gave me a script, Phoebe, and you said, Lee, recite the script. I would go, okay. And I would read the words and I'd recite them to you. And I would still be very much in this grounded body. But when you channel, something else is happening altogether. It's like my experience is, it's like the higher parts of my, if you like, my inner line of chakras, it extends. And it's like the words are coming from above and dropping in, and they do go through my mind. I'm not in a trance. I'm kind of just sat behind, so I can stop or block the channel at any moment if I want to. And the trick is like trying to keep my own reaction to what I'm channeling as behind the scenes as I can, so that I don't block or stop anything. There have been a couple of times, more in years past, where some of the stuff they were saying was slightly triggering to me, and it was hard for me to keep my own nervous system regulated enough to allow them to keep delivering the message. I've kind of got used to it now. So it's a mode you go into. But that day on the tube, I asked them, who are you? And they said, we're your guides. And they said, we're a group of 88, but then we extend wider into source. So they said, you can think of us as a consciousness library. Some of us have been incarnate on the planet before as humans. Some of us haven't. And you can call me Zachary, because I asked, do you have a name? They said, no, we don't really have names, but we know humans need names and you use names. So you can call me Zachary. I'm the lead spokesperson. I met a couple of the others in the following years, and they gave names Zachariah and Zayadora. And for a little while, they would take it in turns to speak, including publicly. So the reason I call my guides the Z's is because the people who followed my work back in, 2007, 2008, 2009, they started referring to them as the Z's, because you never knew which one you were going to get. Then they just homogenized around 2012, 2013. They said, we're going to stop differentiating now, because it's important for unity consciousness on the planet that you no longer are seeing male and female energies as separate. And they had identified Zayadora and Zafariah as more feminine energy. So they're more of a blend now, and we just call them the Z's.
And do they sound different? You said that it's kind of homogenized now, but they
no,
do
and it's
sound
a little
different.
embarrassing. Like if I never hear the old recordings. I don't listen back to it.
Yeah.
Unless I have to. Like if there's a reason I have to for editing, or I'll hear little pieces. But if I hear a record, it felt very awkward to me when Zafariah and Zayadora would channel through me, especially Zafariah, because she was much more rambunctious. And of course, the thought in my mind was, oh, well, everybody knows you're an actor, so they think you're just hamming it up. But actually what she did was channeling her got me over myself, because I had to face judgment of myself to myself, and also potentially from others. And that's actually been the biggest gift for me of being a public channeler. I very uncomfortably walked towards it, because I'm not stupid. It's not convenient. It's like, you walk into a party. Oh, what do you do? Oh, yeah, I'm in the music industry. Oh, cool. Oh, I'm a doctor. Oh, cool. I'm a channeler. I channel the voice of spirit. Huh? It's like, none of us want that. None of us crave that. So I kind of was willing enough to do it, but unwilling in many different ways at many stages all along the way. And most importantly, because channeling wasn't the only thing I did. I didn't want to have that distract from other things that I wanted to do in life. And interestingly, I think the thing at this point that I'm most known for is being an energy intuitive. But I would never have developed that energy intuitive voice if I hadn't devoted myself to both learning from the channel for so many years and being a public channeler for so many years. Because I was a confident public channeler in terms of the act of doing it, not necessarily if you spoke to me about it afterwards, my human self, but I was a confident public channeler before I got to the point where I now am a confident intuitive speaker.
And so when you think about energy intuition, and you call yourself a transformation guide, why did you choose those words? Did those words choose you? Like, what does that mean to you? What do those words mean to you?
Words are so annoying. They're like the best thing, and they're the word. It's hard because I fully recognize that words are, I guess, one of my gifts. And yet I also know that words are so personal, and we all hear things slightly different ways, and certain words are barriers and certain words are attractors. So I think partly because we're still in a field that is pioneering itself, which is the normalization of spirituality on the planet. Because I'm a big advocate of, if someone says, oh, well, I'm not spiritual, I would say, actually, you are. Because to be a human having an experience where you're feeling things, sensing things, alive, making things happen on the receiving end of things, to me, that is actually what being spiritual is. That is where there is a spirit moving through you. And if you've ever been with a dead body, that's a great time to really understand what the soul is. Because when you're there with someone's dead body and their soul is no longer in it, you're like, it's very clearly they are not them anymore. It's just, and even the way they look is very different, because you've never seen their physical features so still and limp. You're used to seeing how the soul was animating the way they moved. So I'm a big believer in we're all spiritual, but at the same time, we're still in this early period, I think, on the planet where it's all getting a bit more normalized. So energy intuitive was a term that I came up with maybe 7-8 years ago, because I needed a label for, well, what's he doing when he's not channeling? Like when he's not channeling and he's in energy intuitive mode, which is how I ended up doing most of my personal sessions after the first few years. I found a way to, without letting it be the Z's vantage point, from this point, trying to bridge what's going on up here, and how's that showing up for us on a human level, and how can we bridge the two? Because I saw a lot of people using channeling, basically getting a contact high off channeling, floating out the room, and then not knowing how the hell to implement any of it. And I empathize, you know, because it does. Channeling will give you a frequency lift and a frequency shift, because that's what it does. It's no different to experiencing a Reiki session. If channeling resonates with you, if it doesn't, you won't feel anything. Same with Reiki. But Energy Intuitive came from there, and then obviously the channeling part is when I'm channeling. And the reason Transformation Guide and Transformation Teacher came out was because there are many different things I've done over the years, but being a facilitator for others of their self-growth, holding space for them while they go through a growth process, supporting them to take some leaps and giving them insights, tips, ways to get there. Because I've been a student of self-growth all my life, really, since my teens. That was where that term came from. And who knows, they might all change again in a few years. I think Energy Intuitive is a keeper, and has been for a while.
I'm just curious, because I was like, I don't know how to choose. I just feel like it's every day, it's something different. So now I'm just like, I write, I speak, I play, I explore. I don't know.
And that's
just
great.
hard.
The thing is, the labels aren't needed unless someone needs to understand you.
Right.
And the problem with the label is there are all kinds of preconceptions. So, for example, if I'm at a party and I say to you, you know, we're having a lovely conversation, and then I say to you, or you say, what do you do? And I say, I'm a tax man. You'll go, oh. You know, it's like, if you have any negative association with tax, or if you've only ever, I've immediately gone into a box. So that's the tricky thing about these labels. But the other reason that we kind of need them is I do think that language still needs to be built for most of us, for us in the mainstream, around what are these slightly amorphous things that have been hidden from view in mainstream society for a few hundred years and more, and how do we find ways to frame them for people so that they can have some understanding of what it is they're experiencing or exploring.
Yeah, I have a background in marketing. That's kind of where I started. So it's really interesting when I've worked with people and they're like, well, I'm like, we need to just nail something so that we can market it we know the direction that we're going. So we've got to sort of put ourselves in that box. Yeah.
And I resisted that for years. For years, I was like, I don't want to, you know, and then eventually I grew up a little bit, and I realized that I was doing a disservice to the people who wanted to engage with what I was doing. And I realized the importance of that for the person that you're serving, and also for them to be able to share it with the people in their life. Like, one of the biggest jokes with my mom is constantly, we'll be on the phone or on FaceTime, and she'll go, oh yes, I met Jean last week. Now, what is it you do again? I was trying to tell, you know, and it's so, you know, I'm always trying to come up with, say, you know, like a life coach, you know, it's true, you know, it's like we all need to somehow understand things. So it is important, those marketing handles, if you like, because we market in life too, right? In our personal life.
Right. Well, my mom thinks I sell things on the internet. That's what she tells her friends. I'm like, you know what? Okay, it's jewelry. I'm like either an Etsy, you know, jewelry maker, or like, I don't know, but that works. So we'll go with it.
That's
but
great.
I think one of the things that I think is really interesting is knowing, when you were saying that you can block it or you can turn it off. I know for me personally, I was worried. There was this really, I was frightened that I would just not be able to exist in real life, you know, in the physical. And what I really like about your work is that you talk so much about, you know, even when you were saying the channeling, that it is active participation, that I've got to meet you halfway, and that so I don't just leave and kind of float away. And so when you are looking at, you know, Lee, the human person that has relationships and exists in real life, you know, in real life or whatever, however we're going to call it.
Real life, and
then the Lee that's channeling, and that's, you know, incredibly intuitive. Have you experienced any challenges or difficulties in separating the two?
There have been a couple of times in my life where if I'm really living at that frequency for sustained periods of time, I have to really be mindful about grounding. It's interesting because I've been married now. Well, we've been together for 4 years, just coming up to 4 years. And, or is it 5 years? No, we're coming up to 5 years. Yeah.
You should know this.
I
Come on.
should know this. You know, and the irony is I'm normally really good at dates. It was 2015 October. So yeah, we're coming up on 5 years. And Stephen has been great for that because although he is very sensitive and intuitive, he's also very grounded. Like part of his thing is being rooted. And so I think when we first got together, you know, I suddenly had to pay attention to, oh, now I need to be down on the ground with him.
Yeah.
Whereas before we were together, I could just, you know, do this all day and it didn't matter, you know, it didn't matter where I was. So I think that has been one thing. I would say that something that comes to mind when you ask this question is, I think that the saddest thing for me about doing this career and doing that work is misinterpretation from people I used to know. I remember once we put something on Facebook and it was back in, I mean, this was going back like 7, 8 years. And somebody I really loved who I did several theater jobs with and was just this lovely person. I really, really love her. I don't know whether she was on the wine or I don't know what was going on for her when she decided to write this comment on Facebook, but a piece of the channeled information had been put on Facebook, which we do. So I guess if you don't really understand what's going on or you don't really pay attention to the specifics of my work, you might think that when you read a quote from the Z's on Facebook, that has come directly from my human consciousness and mouth, which isn't the case. And she wrote something like, I used to know Lee Harris, and the Lee Harris I knew was, and she said really nice things. She said, you know, very complimentary. He was fun. He was lovely. I don't know who this person is who's disappeared up his own. And I was just so, I was like, well, I couldn't believe it. Wow. And what I realized is, unless somebody is a very compassionate person who can hold space for all of somebody, or knows how to do that for themselves, is usually when those either they're just a very loving, compassionate person, or they've been through some really tough times in their life and they've developed compassion for whatever's going on for somebody. Surfing those two worlds is going to be not so much a problem for you, but it might be a problem for how you are perceived. And I've often found that the hardest part, not so much balancing it for myself, because I pretty much know how to do that now, especially at this point. But still, I'm shocked when I notice somebody responding to me a certain way because they just learned what I did. Yeah. And that part for me is still a bit of a shame, but I accept that it's part of the world that we live in and it's just part of life.
And so for those people that are, you know, some of the people that might be listening to this now, you know, are not really into it, don't really believe it, or, you know, kind of have some doubts around any kind of spirituality or intuition or speaking to channeling. What do you think? I don't want to, you know, demonize anything because everyone has their own beliefs and their own stances, but is there a reason or an underlying something that you feel that maybe you can recognize in somebody who is, you know, has an aversion to spirituality or intuition or any of this that, you know, kind of puts them, maybe they believe a certain thing, or do you kind of get what I'm saying here?
I do. And I think often it comes down to negative experiences. So either they have had negative experiences themselves with their own experience of intuition or their own connection to spirit, or they have been around maybe a very talented psychic or intuitive person who at a human level had behavioral issues. So it's that psychic that you go to that's really powerful, but also because of their own trauma is a bit narcissistic, judgmental, and abusive. So in one minute they're helping you and loving you, and then in the next minute they cut you down. And that intersects with your own low self-esteem, because anybody who, you know, cuts you down, if you're like, you'd be like, yeah, I'm sorry, that's not a very nice thing to say. But if you haven't found that strength in yourself yet, which I know I didn't have for years, and I think this is true for lots of sensitive people, it can it can bring a certain shadowy aspect to the intuitive realm. And you know, intuitives are no different to any other human being. There are going to be intuitives you will really like. There are going to be intuitives that you don't really vibe with, you don't really connect with them. So I think there are some people who are just really happy, spiritual and religious atheists, but they aren't trying to force that opinion on anyone else or punish those who are spiritual or religious. They're the best. The people who want to punish others, they're really basically playing a righteous dictator game. You know, if you want to, it's the same seed energy as dictators have. Dictators believe they are so right about their will and the way things should be. They don't care how many people are going to suffer or become casualties in order to see that will through. So there is a disconnection from human empathy in a dictator that usually when they've, you know, if you study dictators, they usually had incredibly traumatic childhood, and or their emotional wiring is a little off. Just the way that they are literally chemically wired, they are missing empathy. They are missing a certain compassion for other human beings, which will allow them to commit atrocities in the name of their beliefs. Now, I'm talking about dictators who like do major things in countries. We've all met the dictator in our street, at our workplace, and sometimes in ourself, where you're like, oh God, that wasn't very nice. You know, so that dictator energy is on the planet. Some people blow it up really big and it can be in the room. And so I think, you know, when you think about intuitives and spiritual people, I think often, like I said with the tax man, if somebody had a really bad experience with a psychic, they might then assume that all psychic phenomena or anybody who works as a psychic is going to have the personality traits and behavioral issues of that same person. We go, oh, I'm going to the acupuncturist. I've been to probably 6 different acupuncturists in my life. I love the method of acupuncture. I think it's great. Every single one of those acupuncturists were good in different ways, and they brought a different energy to that table and to my treatment. So I think this is where we have to be careful with labels, because when you take a human personality and a soul and you mix it with a skill, you get, that's the beauty of life. It's like everyone is a little bit unique and a little bit different.
I really appreciate that. I think there are a lot of times where if I had judged maybe a tarot card reader or a psychic or anyone that I've been to based on that encounter only, and not, you know, I've had obviously, like anything, good experiences and not so great experiences where I'm like, well, okay, I'll still give it a chance, because I think there was always something in me that knew that I wanted to kind of pursue that, or I wanted to kind of look a little bit deeper into my own spirituality. And so do you think that everybody has that kind of nudge if they are meant to live more of a spiritual life? Like if somebody's listening to this and they've already turned it off, then they're just not meant to have, maybe meant to be open, versus somebody who's like, I'm doubtful because I can't grasp it. There's no, you know, a lot of times a lot of people are not seeing anything. Like with you, it's like, you're not seeing something different. I'm seeing you just happen to be saying words that, you know, are coming through you versus kind of tangible. So what do you say to those people?
Well, I think if you're somebody who's disconnected from spirituality and you're a happy person, great. You've won the lottery. That's exactly where you should be. Like, I don't think spirituality in and of itself is an important thing for us to study. I think living an open, expanded life is an important thing for us to be. And if the study of spirituality and intuition is going to be part of that for you, because you are a naturally intuitive person, it's one of your skill sets and it's going to be something you need to develop and open in your life, fantastic. If the study of engineering, because you are this master engineer and you have this mind that's designed to solve and build and formulate, that's going to be your bliss. And that's what you came to the planet for, to contribute. That's going to be your spiritual experience. So I think first and foremost, if you're happy without being intuitive or spiritual, and you can pretty much say, sure, you have some bad days, maybe you have some bad moments. You can look at some of your behaviors and go, I could probably be a little nicer when I'm in road rage mode, and I'm working on it. But generally, I actually feel friendly towards most people. I want to give to them. Then I think you're good. But I do think, and I see this a lot, there are those of us for whom this spontaneous awakening that we did not see coming happens.
Mm.
And sometimes it's because you were seeking, and sometimes it's because something major happens in your life. You
Mm.
lose a loved one, some dramatic near-death experience. You know, there are all of these stories where people are shaken out of what we call the programming. So the programming, to give an example, just in case anyone listening or watching hasn't considered the idea that we're programmed, the programming is what you hear when you're a kid. You're going to grow up and you're going to get a job and you'll get paid this much each week and you'll give this to the tax man. There's the tax man again. And then you might get married if you're going to, you know, it's like it's all laid out for you and you're supposed to just follow.
Mm.
There isn't much room for chaos, invention. And sure, you can like invent within that, but the programming is what we are told we are supposed to be. Even the way our system is on the planet right now, you could click your fingers and tomorrow this world could be a different kind of chaos. There's no government. We're all like fending for ourselves. It could be way more peaceful. It could be way more violent. Who knows what it's going to be? So the programming is the structure, the ideas, the beliefs, and the rules that are holding us all together. So that programming breaks down when a spiritual awakening happens. And sometimes you do it very diligently because you're like, wow, I realize I've had some really limited ideas about relationships because I've had 3 really bad relationships. This time I'm going to look at my own patterns, my beliefs. How did I get here? Because I want to create a good one. Or the other side is you're absolutely fine. You think everything's all right in your life. And wham, something happens in your life that you did not see coming. But it shakes you, it wakes you, and it suddenly makes you go, hang on a second, I think there's more to life than this. And so one interruption to our program recently has been this coronavirus experience.
Mm.
Regardless of what you think about it itself, regardless of what your political opinions, your government opinions are, just take all that away for a second. Our pattern as a human race got very interrupted, and it has also affected nature and the earth in a very palpable way. So it just goes to show when we stop the program that we're all on, transformation can happen. It's not always easy. It's not always pleasant. We don't always love it. Not everybody loves being locked in their house. But through being locked in their house, some interesting investigation, emotional movement, choices are beginning to move in a way that they wouldn't have been if we were all still just doing what we were doing before. So
I can relate some. Before we started recording, I told you that I was hit by a car, and that was 7 months ago. And then the coronavirus, it's just like
oh, wow. I didn't
interrupted.
realize it was so close. My God, you've had quite a year.
It's been a really interesting couple of months, but it's been so, I mean, as soon as I stood up, I was like, this is a gift. And I don't know why, but all the psychics and intuitives that I've talked to about it have had a lot to say, which is just that I needed an interruption. So the way that I feel my life has shifted has been pretty substantial and significant. So I really appreciate what you're saying. And even as, you know, you're looking at when you're on the tube and then this voice just kind of comes into, do you think that it always happens that way? Like if somebody is listening, are they waiting for a voice? Because I know personally with a couple of my former clients, we would talk a lot about intuition, and they'd be like, well, I just, like, I'm sitting on the mat and I'm doing my thing, and it feels almost like this needy desperation versus allowing and spaciousness. So how do you see people kind of open that up or become a little bit more intuitive?
Well, number one, I always say to people, don't worry too much about trying to meet your guides. If you're meant to meet your guides, you will. I was not trying to meet my guides. I believed there was maybe guides around me, but that was not my focus. And boom, it happened to me. Focus on accessing the voice of your soul. So when I teach people how to open up channeling for themselves, I'm not teaching them how to do the channeling, because I'll have rooms with hundreds of people in them, or like online courses with a lot more than that on the call. And I will just interrupt it and go, okay, now we're all going to channel. And it's amazing. We hand out paper, we hand out pens, or I get people on the other side of the screen to grab a pen and paper, and people do it. And nobody in those rooms goes, oh no, nothing happened, because they're kind of just forced into it. When I teach channeling, what I'm really teaching is, how do you respond to what happens? Because that's the biggest problem. It's not the actual sitting down with a pen and paper. And the way I would advise anyone listening or watching to try this for themselves is write the sentence, what does my soul want to tell me today? What does my soul want to tell me today? And if you do this many times, you don't need to write the sentence. You can just start writing. And then just let yourself for like a minute or 2 minutes, doesn't have to be a long time, just write the sentences that fall onto that page and see what comes through you, and start to allow that to change you. The thing that you said about, and by the way, the reason we write it down is, it's easy to have an intuition in your mind and you'll forget it and it will remain amorphous. When you see it on a piece of paper, and this is how I really developed my channeling, I would come home every night after work and I would write all these questions, and then I would write all the answers. And that way I could look at the evidence. So 3 weeks, 4 weeks later, I would go back and read the old ones about these questions I had asked, and I would see how these things were playing out. Doesn't mean everything played out exactly. I think with intuition, one of the myths that we get lost in is that there is this set timeline future for you. And the thing I've learned is there are destiny forces at work. So for example, in your life, Phoebe, one of your gifts in life and one of your challenges in life will have been your voice and speaking your truth. So that will have been an area of challenge for you, because it's an area of gift for you that you're also bringing out to other people. Because not only is it your focus and intent with this show, you hold a vibration of, I found my voice. So everybody else who's listening, whether they know it or not, is subconsciously, oh, I'm listening to someone who found their voice. I like listening to her. It's not just because she has a great personality, and it's not just because I like the topics. There's something about her that makes me think I can find my voice too. So it's all very subconscious. But one of the tricky things with intuition, I think, is we get fixed on, well, my intuition is going to tell me it's all going to be okay. We have an emotional response to our intuition, and that's where the work comes in. Because if you're having a really awful time in life, and one day you get this intuition that in 6 to 8 months, everything's going to be so much better, you're like, and your whole being lights up, because you're taken from this low contracted place to this, I had this intuition. A couple of things are going to happen. You're either going to get super addicted to intuition. You're going to want to go back for another hit. I can't get an intuition today. You know, it's like, I want that feeling again. But also, you're maybe going to forget that our job then as a human is to help guide that process. Whether it's being really compassionate to ourselves because we're being really hard on ourselves about our fear of what we just saw and going, it's okay, I have some fear. I'm going to need to move. I'm going to need to let this fear be in my body for a few days. Of course I'm afraid. I just got shown that I'm moving to Brazil and I'm going to be in a happy relationship. And I just came out of an awful one. So I'm full of trauma right now that any other relationship's going to re-traumatize me. So I've got a little ways to go. But my intuition, I believe that's true. So what it's showing me is this is the direction I can move. It might be that we need to take action steps to support that intuition. So I think if you see intuition as a passive part of your personality, you're in big trouble. If you're just going to it for a drug hit every now and then, you know, it's like going to the tarot reader every week. You know, you could go to the tarot reader every week, or you could try dialing it back to once a month and seeing what active changes you can make in that month to work with the intuition that is guiding you to a bigger future. Because our intuition and our soul is always going to be guiding us to a bigger future. The most interesting part of all of it is when we as a human also go, how could I help myself get to Brazil? Well, I know nothing about Brazil and I'm terrified about the language. Why don't I start learning the Brazilian language? And if I don't get to Brazil, it doesn't matter. I'm just moving in a direction of expansion, because intuition will also reroute us. You know, we might be told we're going to Brazil in 8 months and we think it's all going to happen. But actually, that moves, that changes. But the very fact that we were willing to consider such a big move, which felt really traumatizing to us, means that when someone says, will you move to Portland, Oregon and work here with me for 6 to 12 months? And you're like, oh, well, that's okay. That I can do because I've already uprooted myself emotionally. You go and do that. 6 months later, you meet said person who is this relationship at the right time that you have healed enough to no longer be traumatized about the idea of being in a relationship.
Oh my gosh, I can resonate with, or I just resonate with so much of what you said. I feel like in that example of like the Brazil move, in it's like then you'll meet somebody in the class when you're learning the language or something like that's always, it just feels like with, as I am looking through my life, it's like I am headed in this direction. It's like, oh, that was just, I just had to take a step in that direction and then I'm rerouted over here and it just feels easier, but
Yeah.
it's allowing that flow to happen, which is why I think what you do and what you talk about with the active participation is so important, because I see a lot of people that, and I mean, I was guilty of this for sure, sitting on my mat and wishing it to happen and manifesting and all the, which I
Me too,
think a lot of
Phoebe.
people.
Me too. I was
Right.
running to the tarot reader as often as I could. I loved
Right.
it. I was like, yeah, hit me up. You know what I mean? And then the more I was willing to lean into the self-growth of it, that
Mm.
became the most interesting thing. And also, I think because of the Z's, they would say this a lot, grounding your spiritual energy is the best.
Mm.
And I feel like I had to work through various layers of trauma in myself in various areas of my life in order to get to a place and a position where I really started to see, oh, now I'm alchemizing it. Now there is that flow and magnetism in my life that used to be something I experienced every 3 months when I went to a self-growth workshop, or, if I really focused. And now that's actually more the normal state than the
Mm.
non-normal state. But I've had to grow into it like we all do. And we're all continuing to grow and refinding our balance on the planet all the time when the planet changes and goes, now try this, kind of like what we're all like, whoa, what's this?
Mm.
So I think that's the thing. And the one thing they say is the universe is always in movement. And so too will our timelines be. So for me, once you've started listening to intuition, and the skeptic in me needed to make assessments. I
Mm.
needed to write these things down so that I could make assessments as to how valid they were, and especially if I was working with other people. Like, there was no way I was going to go out there and I didn't want to in any way mess people up. That would have been like the worst thing for me. So I always say hold intuition lightly,
Mm.
meaning it will take you somewhere, but check again 3 or 4 days later and see if it's still true for today, and be willing to move and adapt with it. And I run my work very intuitively and practically. I kind of,
Mm.
I do a lot of chopping wood and carry water, but intuition is leading. But that also means I have to be willing to adapt with a week's notice. If I feel that the group that we're serving needs something different, we will hijack a course that we've been planning for months, and we'll go, no, we have to put, so you kind of have, it's very active listening.
Mm. I can imagine that that would be just, I mean, I aspire to be more intuitive in the way that I kind of maneuver with my business. And
Mm.
so when you look to like what the future holds for you, what is success in your line of work? Like, what does that look like for you? What is that like, I've made it moment for you?
Honestly, now, like,
Okay.
I've really, it's a great question. I could die tomorrow, and in the moment I pass over, when they go, look back on the experience you had with your work, I would be blown away.
Hmm.
Like, just because of the journey of it. And because of the, I feel so grateful, lucky, and joyous to not only be in this position in the world where, we're serving the amount of people we're serving. I have this amazing team of beautiful people who are like family to me that I get to work with to do this. That's deeply satisfying. But also, I've developed the stamina and the know-how and the emotional stability to handle this that I never had before. Like I could give you examples 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, so that makes me feel just really lucky. I'm like, wow, this, because it's a real growth journey, an interior growth journey. And it's lovely that we get to do what we do. And yeah, honestly, I say that because that got very clear to me in about the last 6-9 months. I was like, oh, someone said, what would change your life? And I was like, well, I mean, sure, other things could happen. Yeah, sure. But who cares? It's like, actually, I'm like, this is extraordinary. So yeah, and that doesn't mean I'm always happy.
Right.
I definitely have been triggered by certain things in the last few months, as many people have. There are things that break my heart about this planet. There are things that can break my heart about certain relationship dynamics I hear about from what a friend's on the receiving end of. That can, make me sad. But in terms of the work, I'm like, well, does it get better than this? I mean, if it does, okay, but I'm good. It's like this is pretty cool. Like because it's very different to other stages of my work journey in the last 20 years.
And do you think it took those kind of that contrast between what because you've had that experience and now you're at a place where you can really appreciate it? Or do you think that that's just kind of happened over time naturally?
I think it's twofold. It's partly a bit more maturity on my part, emotional, psychological, physical body. Like I just turned 44. So there is something about getting older that, I've always heard from all of my older friends and mentors, but it's true. Something in you just relaxes a little bit and calms down. But it's funny because I think I wouldn't have been able to own this about myself a few years ago. I think I would have shied away from owning something like this. I recently realized I'm relentless. Like because I can see sides of myself that I think I could improve, and I'm all, but I'm like, wow, actually, Lee, you're pretty relentless. I feel very lucky. I've been very fortunate. I've had a lot of support, but I also recognize that I've been a bit of a driving force in the center of it all. Whether I've been relentless about the things I don't know that I need to learn, the mentors that I've found at the right times, but I've been very relentless with this mission drive that I have. And it's only in recent kind of 12 months that I've kind of looked back at myself and gone, oh, actually, I will take some credit for that aspect of me. Because that's something I've learned about myself. And I think Stephen's helped me see that about myself, because there's nothing like a partner up close to kind of, I'm like, oh, I am pretty relentless. He said, oh, I can see you're in your work focus now. And I'm like, oh yeah, because it takes a lot of focus. And I would say the same about the people I work with, the team that helped me produce the work that we produce now. They're really dedicated to what they do. And so I think that has allowed the multiplication of what we're doing to happen.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I heard you say on a different interview, you were saying that, the people that you hire, it's like you're bringing them in and sometimes they're expecting to almost be like, free access to you and, that kind of version of yourself. But really, it's like the dedication that you have to the work that you're doing that makes those hires super important, because you have quite a lean team, don't you? Isn't that true?
I think there are, there are 11. 13 if we count the accountants, who are really the team actually, because they are having that's quite a job transaction, especially now with all these VAT and all this kind of crazy stuff. It's like, oh my God, thank God they're taking care of that for us. There are 13 of us who are on the payroll each month. And so I guess I don't know if we are a lean team, but I think we're lean given how much we produce. And then there are subcontractors. Like we just had this brilliant filmmaking team in Slovenia. We hired them to make a music video for us. So, but yeah, the core team is 11.
That is amazing.
It is. I mean, it's crazy. If I hear myself, if I heard myself say that in 2010 when it was just me, It's like, wow, how did this happen? But the
Yeah.
thing is, I think if you're willing to let your work be bigger than you and to recognize that you serve your work. So I think we serve our audience, and I also serve a company called Lee Harris Energy. And it's very important that people understand that when they run a company. Just because your name might be in the company, it doesn't mean that company is you. That company is an entity that has been created by the people it serves, the people who originated it, and which would be me, and then all the people who are working in it. So, I'm in service to that thing that may have my name on it as a identifier for people, but it's bigger than me, and it's bigger than any individual in the company too.
Mm, I love it. I feel like I could talk to you for days. I have so
I
many
love
more
talking to
questions.
you too. Such great questions.
I mean, I wish we had, 4 hours, but we don't. So I do
I will
want
come. We'll
to,
come. We'll do another thing. I'll come back. We'll
this
We'll
is
figure it out. Yeah.
part one of 10.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay.
Um, so I do want to kind of ask you, for people that do want to hear more about you and want to learn more about your work or your courses or your music videos. I know you're quite into music, and we didn't even get to touch on that. Where can they find you? Where can they learn more about you?
So my website is leeharrisenergy.com. And if you go there, that will kind of be the best place to find everything. We also have a YouTube channel called Lee Harris Energy. But yeah, the website's probably the best one-stop shop. And, I have a monthly members community called The Portal. Every month, I do a 90-minute broadcast that involves a real deep dive energetically for our community, but also is an hour of taking questions. So I love it because I take like 35 minutes worth of questions in energy intuitive mode, and then normally about 25 minutes the Z's. And people come live onto the call, via audio. And so that's one of the main things in the portal. But we also produce audio tools, meditation, Qigong video, which Stephen provides every single month. Stephen, my husband, who is a Qigong and meditation teacher and a writer. So the portal is like our place to support sensitives. It's a sanctuary, but it's also a place to give you tools to thrive and grow and learn. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay. So if you're watching or listening to this, go check that out. I do want to kind of end on a final question, which is, if this episode, YouTube video, whatever, was broadcasted to the whole world for 30 seconds, what? No pressure.
Did you have this? I was like, oh God, that's a lot of people.
I should have warned you about this one.
But I would have worn a disguise.
What message would you have? And it can be as, articulate or not as you want, but what message would you have for people in the world that were listening to this?
That if you care about your life and the lives of those that you love, we all have to do better in the years to come around how we care for each other, how we care for the planet, how we care for our resources. And sometimes that's going to involve saying a very big no to certain forces, agendas that might want to take us a different direction. I have faith that we will see transformation, but I only have that faith if we all are willing to get behind it.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. I cannot thank you enough. I'm
Please,
honored.
you don't have to thank me enough. It was lovely of you to invite me on the show. Like I said to you when I got your email, I love what you're doing. I think just the way the show and the way you're presenting it, and is just you're doing beautiful work. So it was really my honor to get to come and chat to you for a bit. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. You're gonna make me cry. Thank you. I admire your work. I love what you do, and I'm just so grateful that you are expanding the way that you are and as quickly as you are, and really capturing the attention of so many people, because what you're doing in the world is so needed. So thank you for your work. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Was that not the best interview? I absolutely adore him. He is such a kind and caring and compassionate human being. And if you think that was good, I want to invite you and remind you what I talked about before the interview was that I have a list of resources that he mentioned on today's episode. And not only that, but I held him back for 10 minutes to talk about how he has built his multi-million-dollar company. So I asked him things about how he uses intuition to make big decisions in business, what he has had to start doing and stop doing in order to scale with grace and with beauty and with integrity, and also what the greatest strategy, tip, tool, resource that he has used to scale his business in the last 3 to 5 years. That one you are not gonna want to miss. I learned so much in these 8 minutes. So I want to invite you over there. Again, all you have to do is head over to unbecomingpodcast.com/133. The number 133, episode 133. So that is unbecomingpodcast.com/133. Thank you so much for being here. If you are new to the show, welcome. I hope you'll stick around. I hope you will listen to a couple other great interviews that we've had with amazing entrepreneurs, athletes, supermodels, and people that are so incredibly inspiring, like Lee was today. If you have been with us for a long time, thank you so much. If you haven't yet left a review on Apple Podcasts, please go over and do that. It is so simple and it means the world to me. So thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. And I hope to see you next week on another episode of Unbecoming. Take care.